Slava Isusu Christu, Slava Navika, glory be to Jesus Christ, glory be forever. This is Father Basil Malovany again, doing another podcast. Hope everyone is safe and healthy wherever you are listening to this podcast from. And I guess we're getting some bad weather again coming up in my area of Canada and Saskatchewan. It's supposed to be another winter storm coming these next couple of days before Easter. So again, everyone stay safe on the highways, and when you're traveling and visiting your family and friends for Easter, just remember to stay safe all the time. I have been, as I mentioned in my previous podcast, teaching a lot, but I decided the next couple of days it might not be the best, especially if there's going to be a winter storm coming. So I'll just be doing preparations for the Easter weekend and hope that everyone, again, stays safe. So today, just want to talk a little bit about these days of Passion Week, Holy Week as we call it. On Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of Holy Week in our tradition, we celebrated the pre-sanctified liturgy. And those of you who don't know what that is, the regular liturgy of St. John Chrysostom that we celebrate on Sundays and most weekdays of the year is not celebrated during Lent on weekdays, because the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom is a joyous liturgy. It's a liturgy of the resurrection, talking about the joy of the resurrection. So, of course, during Lent, we are not necessarily talking about the resurrection. We're talking about fasting and penance and forgiveness. So that's why this liturgy of the pre-sanctified is done instead, and it's basically a Vespers with a communion at the end. And during this Holy Week, there's also readings that we do during this liturgy from the Gospels, preparing for Jesus' death on the cross. So, talking about his passion, and talking also the Jesus warning us about what's gonna be happening in the world, and yesterday's reading for Holy Thursday was, basically Jesus talking about the Last Judgment, and when he is going to come in glory and judge the living and the dead. And, we've heard this gospel many times before, where he will separate the goat like the sheep, and on one side he will say, the heavenly kingdom is prepared for you, come enjoy it. And the people will say, well, he said, you basically did everything I wanted you to do on earth. You cared for other people, you fed the hungry, you cared for the poor, you cared for the sick. And then he said, oh, well, when you do it for others, you do it for me. And then on the other side, he said, get away from me, those souls that are prepared for the fires of hell and all the demons, because you never cared for anyone but yourself. You didn't feed the hungry and the sick, and didn't clothe the naked, and then visit those in hospital and the sick, and visit the imprisoned. And they'll say, well, when did we ever see you in those situations? And he goes, when you didn't do it for others, you didn't do it for me. So that's a stark warning for us, for all of us, how we're supposed to live our lives. And we have to live in humility, of course, and in self-giving to others. We always have to do self-giving. And also, part of that story, the gospel that we read yesterday was interesting because he talked about that other parable of the bridesmaids where they came to a wedding, these virgins, and they didn't have enough. Some of them didn't have enough oil to light their lamps, and they asked for. They fell asleep because the groom came very late, and by the time the groom came, some of the lamps. Remember that time they all had oil lamps. They didn't have enough oil to light their lamps, so they asked the other bridesmaids who had oil for some, and they said no. And so these bridesmaids had to go to the town to buy oil. And by the time they came back, the wedding that was happening, the doors were shut, and they wouldn't let anyone in. And that, again, is a warning to us to always be prepared. Always be prepared for Jesus to come into our lives, When we are not prepared, when we are not prepared for Jesus' coming, his second coming, we are going to be like those bridesmaids and be barred from the heavenly kingdom, So we have to be very watchful and very cautious all of our lives. And and then the final parable that we read yesterday in that long gospel reading for Holy Tuesday was the parable of the talents, where we know that parable very well, where Jesus, the landowner or the rich man, gave these certain talents to his servants, 5,000 to one, 2,000 to another, and 1,000 to another. And he went away on a long trip, and he came back, and he asked what they did with these talents. And the one that had 5,000 invested it to get 5,000 more. Then another one that had 2,000 invested to get 2,000 more. But the one that had 1,000 hid his talents and put him in a hole because he didn't do anything with them because he was afraid. And then, of course, the master got very angry at that person for wasting the talents and not investing in them, and then gave them to the one that had 10,000. And again, what does that tell us today? Is that we have to use the gifts, spiritual gifts that Jesus gave to us. And when we waste our spiritual gifts, we are going to be like that man who wasted his 1,000 talents and then use those gifts to spread the good news of the gospel to everyone we meet, We are very afraid sometimes. We are very afraid to be hurt by other people, to be ridiculed, to be persecuted. But the gospel tells us we should not be afraid. We need to use all of our spiritual gifts to help one another grow in our faith. And if we just continue to say, well, that's the priest's job, or that's not my job to do that, then we are fooling ourselves. We are very, very much fooling ourselves in our spiritual life. It's all of our jobs to spread the faith. God gives all of us so many gifts and talents that we could be using every day in our lives. And we need to use those gifts. Okay? If we say, well, I'm too busy, or I'm too afraid, or I'm too preoccupied with other things, then we're gonna find out in the end that Jesus is gonna judge us for what we have done and haven't done with the spiritual gifts that we have. Okay? So it's a very stark warning, the gospel we read yesterday. And I think Jesus' crucifixion that we're going to be celebrating this week on Thursday and Friday, it talks about self-sacrifice, that we have to give of ourselves. We can't hide from other people. We can't hide from our helping spread the gospel to others. We can't do that. This world could be so much better if we actually use the gifts that Jesus gave to us for unselfish purposes, not selfish purposes, for unselfish purposes. So much we could do for one another in this world right now. But that's something that we all have to reflect upon ourselves and see where we are in our spiritual life, to how we're growing, how we are helping each other in our world. And believe me, as we know, this world needs a lot of help right now. But that's basically what I want to say for today. And again, for those of you who are being affected by those winter storms that are coming, God bless you. Be safe. Don't drive when you don't need to. I certainly don't want to drive these next couple of days. But I will have to for the weekend, of course, for all my services. But hopefully the storm will pass by then. So I will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.